The old oak tree stood tall at the corner of Maple Street and Pine Avenue, its branches stretching over both roads like protective arms. For years it had been the pride of the neighborhood, providing shade during hot summer days and turning brilliant shades of orange and red come fall. But today, the tree was the center of a growing storm. Tom Chen stood on his front porch, arms crossed tightly over his chest as he watched a city worker place orange cones around the massive trunk. The worker, a stocky man with a yellow hard hat, kept glancing up at Tom nervously. Tom didn't care. Let him be nervous. That tree had been there since Tom was a boy, since his parents had first moved into the house 40 years ago, and now the city wanted to cut it down. "This is absolutely ridiculous," Tom muttered under his breath. He hadn't slept well after finding the notice taped to the tree yesterday afternoon. The paper had explained in cold official language that the oak was diseased and posed a safety risk to the community. Tom didn't believe it for a second. The tree was fine. It had dropped a few branches during the last storm, sure, but that was normal. Trees dropped branches. Across the street, Diane Wilson emerged from her house, coffee mug in hand. She spotted Tom and offered a small wave. Tom didn't wave back. Everyone knew Diane was on the city council. Everyone knew she had been pushing for neighborhood beautification for months. This had to be her doing. Diane hesitated, then crossed the street, careful to avoid the muddy spots from last night's rain. "Good morning, Tom," she said, her voice careful, measured. "I see they're getting ready to remove the oak." "Thanks to you," Tom replied, the words coming out sharper than he'd intended. Diane's eyebrows shot up. "Me? Tom, I had nothing to do with this decision. The arborist determined the tree is sick with oak wilt. It could spread to other trees in the neighborhood." Convenient timing, isn't it? Just when you're pushing your fancy new sidewalk plan, that would require removing this tree anyway. Tom didn't bother hiding the bitterness in his voice. That tree had been the backdrop to his entire life, climbing its branches as a child, proposing to his wife under its shade, teaching his own children to climb it years later. Now his wife was gone, his children moved away, and the city wanted to take the tree too. "That's not fair," Diane said, her voice dropping. "The sidewalk expansion plan is still just a proposal. It hasn't even been voted on yet. This is about public safety, Tom." More neighbors were emerging from their houses now, drawn by the commotion. Old Mr. Rivera from the corner house hobbled over with his cane. The young couple who had moved in last month stood uncertainly on their lawn. The twins who delivered newspapers before school stopped their bikes to watch. The city worker was joined by 3 others in a large truck. They unloaded chainsaws and ropes, preparing for the tree's execution. Tom felt sick to his stomach. "They can't do this," he said, more to himself than to Diane. But Diane heard him. "I'm afraid they can. The tree is technically on city property within the easement." "This neighborhood used to care about more than property lines and easements," Tom shot back. "We used to be a community that looked out for each other." Diane's face flushed. "We still are. But sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good." Tom laughed bitterly. "Greater good? That's what they always say when they're about to do something nobody wants." He stepped off his porch and walked toward the tree, ignoring Diane calling his name behind him. The workers had begun setting up their equipment. The one with the clipboard, clearly the supervisor, looked up as Tom approached. "Morning. Sir, we need to ask you to stay back while we work." His tone was professional but firm. "I'd like to see the paperwork," Tom said, standing his ground. "I want to see the arborist report that says this tree is sick." The supervisor looked uncomfortable. "Sir, I don't have that with me. We just get the work orders. If you have questions about the decision, you'll need to contact City Hall." "Convenient," Tom said. "So you're just going to cut it down without proof?" More neighbors had gathered now. Tom could feel their eyes on him. Some were whispering to each other. He recognized a few faces from the neighborhood meetings where Diane had presented her sidewalk expansion plan, people who had nodded along eagerly as she talked about modernizing their streets. "Look, mister," the supervisor said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "I understand you're upset, but we have a job to do. This tree has been marked for removal by the city. It's not just a tree, Tom said, his voice rising. It's part of this neighborhood's history. My children grew up climbing this tree. My grandchildren visit and ask to see it. Have any of you even bothered to check if it's really diseased? Or did you just take the city's word for it? The crowd of neighbors shifted uncomfortably. Tom noticed, several of them exchanging glances. He hadn't meant to make a scene, but something inside him had snapped. This wasn't just about a tree. It was about everything that had been changing in the neighborhood he'd called home for decades. Diane stepped forward, placing herself between Tom and the city workers. Tom, please, this isn't helping. If you have concerns, we can raise them at the next council meeting, but these men are just doing their job. Their job is to cut down a perfectly healthy tree because it doesn't fit into your vision of what this neighborhood should look like, Tommy replied. He turned to address the gathered neighbors. Don't you all see what's happening? First it's this tree, then it's the community garden, then it's tearing down the old houses for those cookie-cutter condos they're building downtown. A few neighbors nodded, but others looked away uncomfortably. Tom felt a hand on his arm and turned to see Mr. Rivera standing beside him. I remember when they planted this tree, the old man said, his voice wavering but clear. It was part of the city's beautification project back in the 70s. My wife and I watched them put it in the ground. Tiny little thing it was. The supervisor checked his watch impatiently. Sir, we have a schedule to keep. One moment, called a voice from the back of the crowd. A tall woman with gray-streaked hair pushed her way forward. Tom recognized her as Dr. Lewis, the biology professor who had moved to the neighborhood a few years back. I'm a plant pathologist, she said, addressing the supervisor. I'd like to examine the tree before you cut it down. Oak wilt has specific symptoms that are quite distinctive. The supervisor hesitated, looking between the growing crowd of neighbors and his crew. Ma'am, we have a work order. Surely a brief examination by a qualified expert wouldn't hurt, Diane interjected, surprising Tom. If the tree is indeed infected with oak wilt, Dr. Lewis will confirm it, and the removal can proceed with the neighborhood's understanding. The supervisor sighed heavily. I suppose we can wait 15 minutes, but that's it. Dr. Lewis nodded and approached the tree, pulling a small magnifying glass from her pocket. The neighbors watched in silence as she examined the trunk, the leaves, and even dug around the roots a bit. After about 10 minutes, she straightened up and addressed the crowd. I don't see any signs of oak wilt. The discoloration on these lower branches appears to be minor storm damage, not disease. In my professional opinion, this tree is healthy. A murmur ran through the crowd. Tom felt a surge of vindication, but it was quickly replaced by uncertainty. If the tree wasn't diseased, why had the city marked it for removal? The supervisor was on his phone now, speaking in low tones to someone on the other end. The workers stood awkwardly by their equipment, clearly unsure how to proceed. Well, Diane said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. It seems there may have been a mistake. A mistake? Tom repeated incredulously. Or was someone hoping nobody would question the removal order? Before Diane could respond, the supervisor ended his call and approached them. I've spoken with my manager. Given the situation, we're going to postpone this removal pending further review. We'll need another arborist to examine the tree and file an official report. The neighbors broke into relieved conversation. Several approached Dr. Lewis to thank her. Tom stood silently by the tree, running his hand over its rough bark. He'd won a reprieve, but for how long? Diane approached him cautiously. Tom, I want you to know that I really didn't have anything to do with this. If there was some mix-up with the removal order, I'll get to the bottom of it. Tom studied her face, looking for signs of deception. He'd known Diane for years. Their children had gone to school together. But lately it felt like she had become a stranger, too caught up in her position on the city council. Why should I believe you? You've been pushing to modernize this neighborhood since you got elected. This tree doesn't fit your vision. Diane's expression hardened. That's not fair, and you know it. I care about this community just as much as you do. We just have different ideas about what's best for it. its future. The future, Tom scoffed. What about respecting the past? What about the things that make this neighborhood special? Times change, Tom. We can't just freeze everything in place because it reminds us of better days. Her words hit home harder than Tom wanted to admit. Was that what he was doing? Clinging to a tree because it reminded him of a time when his house was full of laughter, when his wife was still alive, when his children still needed him. The city workers were packing up their equipment, the show apparently over for now. The neighbors were dispersing, returning to their daily routines. Only Tom, Diane, and a few others remained near the old oak. There's a council meeting tomorrow night, Diane said after a moment. You should come. If you care about this neighborhood as much as you say, be part of the conversation about its future. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Tom alone with the tree that had sparked so much commotion. He looked up at its sprawling branches, at the dappled sunlight filtering through its leaves. The tree had stood there for decades, witnessing the changes in the neighborhood, families coming and going, houses being built and renovated, children growing up and moving away. Perhaps it was time for Tom to stop standing on his porch, watching the world change around him. Perhaps it was time to have a say in those changes. With a last look at the old oak, he turned and walked back to his house, already thinking about what he would say at tomorrow night's council meeting. The battle for the old oak tree had only just begun, and with it a new chapter in the life of the neighborhood Tom had called home for so long. Tom hadn't set foot in City Hall for almost 15 years. The last time had been for a property tax dispute that had left him frustrated and no better off financially. As he pushed through the heavy glass doors, the familiar scent of old paper and floor polish brought back those unpleasant memories. The council chambers were already filling up when he arrived. Tom spotted several faces from yesterday's confrontation at the oak tree, including old Mr. Rivera, who sat near the front, his cane propped against the chair beside him. Dr. Lewis, the plant pathologist, was there too, flipping through some papers with a focused expression. Tom chose a seat in the middle of the room, not wanting to appear too eager by sitting in the front row, but not hiding in the back either. A young woman he didn't recognize sat down beside him, offering a polite smile. "First time at a council meeting?" she asked. Tom shook his head. "No, but it's been a while." "You?" "I try to come to all of them," she said. "I'm Nora, by the way. I run the community blog." "Tom Chen," he replied, suddenly realizing why she looked vaguely familiar. He'd seen her around the neighborhood, usually with a camera or notebook in hand. "You're the one who's been writing about the sidewalk expansion project." Nora nodded. "Among other things, I hear you had quite the standoff with the city workers yesterday." Tom felt his face grow warm. News travels fast. "Small neighborhoods always have the best grapevines," Nora said with a smile. "Mind if I ask you a few questions after the meeting? I'd love to get your perspective on the oak tree situation." Before Tom could answer, the room fell quiet as the council members filed in and took their seats at the raised table at the front. Diane was among them, dressed in a navy blazer that made her look more official than she had in her casual clothes the day before. She caught Tom's eye briefly, but gave no indication of recognition. The council meeting began with standard procedures, approving minutes from the last meeting, hearing reports from various departments. Tom listened with increasing impatience. The oak tree wasn't mentioned in any of these reports, and he began to wonder if he'd wasted his evening coming here. Finally, the council president, a stern-looking man named Henderson, announced they were moving to public comments. "Anyone wishing to address the council may line up at the microphone. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes." Tom hesitated, suddenly nervous about speaking in public. But when he saw Mr. Rivera slowly making his way to the microphone line, leaning heavily on his cane, Tom found himself standing up to join him. There were 5 people ahead of Tom in line. The first few spoke about unrelated matters: a request for a stop sign at a dangerous intersection, a complaint about noise from a local bar, a question about recycling pickup. Tom barely listened, rehearsing what he wanted to say in his head. Then, it was Mr. Rivera's turn. The old man stood at the microphone, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted it to his height. "My name is Carlos Rivera," he began, his voice stronger than Tom had expected. "I've lived in this town for 62 years. I want to talk about the oak tree at Maple and Pine." He paused, looking directly at the council members. "That tree means something to our neighborhood. It's not just decoration. It's part of our history." Henderson nodded impatiently. "Yes, Mr. Rivera, we're aware of the situation. The removal has been temporarily postponed pending further evaluation." "But why was it scheduled for removal in the first place?" Mr. Rivera pressed. "We were told it had oak wilt, but Dr. Lewis examined it yesterday and found no disease. Someone made that decision. Someone sent those workers to cut down a healthy tree. We deserve to know who and why." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Henderson looked uncomfortable. "This is a matter for the Public Works Department. They make determinations about tree health and safety." "Then why isn't someone from Public Works here to explain?" Mr. Rivera asked. "Your 3 minutes are up, Mr. Rivera," Henderson said firmly. "Next speaker, please." Tom stepped up to the microphone, his heart pounding. He'd planned to talk about his personal connection to the tree, about his children climbing it, about its importance to him. But Mr. Rivera's questions had changed his mind. "My name is Tom Chen," he began. "I live across from the oak tree on Maple Street. Yesterday, city workers arrived to remove it, claiming it had oak wilt. But when Dr. Lewis examined it, she found no disease." He paused, gathering his courage. "What I want to know is why the removal was ordered in the first place, and I can't help wondering if it has anything to do with the sidewalk expansion project that would require removing that tree anyway." He looked directly at Diane as he said this. Her expression remained neutral, but he noticed her straighten slightly in her chair. "Mr. Chen," Henderson began, but Tom wasn't finished. "This isn't just about one tree. It's about how decisions are made in this community. It's about transparency. If the tree needs to come down for the sidewalk project, then say so. Don't make up a story about disease." Henderson frowned. "Mr. Chen, no one is making up stories. If there was a misdiagnosis of the tree's condition, that's a separate issue from the sidewalk project, which is still in the planning phase. Then why won't anyone explain how the misdiagnosis happened?" Tom pressed. "Who examined the tree? When? Can we see the report?" Henderson's frown deepened. "Your time is up, Mr. Chen. Next speaker." Tom returned to his seat, frustration building. Inside him, he'd accomplished nothing except perhaps making himself look like a troublemaker. Nora gave him an encouraging smile as he sat down. "Good questions," she whispered. The next speaker was Dr. Lewis, who spoke in precise scientific terms about the oak's health, explaining that she had found no evidence of disease and offering to provide a written assessment. The council thanked her politely but made no commitments. Several more residents spoke about the tree, all in favor of saving it. Tom felt a growing sense of hope as speaker after speaker expressed support. The oak clearly meant something to more people than just him. Finally, Henderson announced they were moving on to the next agenda item. Tom felt deflated. Was that it? No answers, no explanations, just "thank you for your comments"? But then Diane raised her hand. "Mr. President, if I may address the concerns about the oak tree before we move on." Henderson looked surprised but nodded. "Councilwoman Wilson, you have the floor." Diane stood, smoothing her blazer. "I want to thank everyone who spoke about the oak tree tonight. Your passion for our community is commendable." She paused, looking around the room. "I've spoken with the Director of Public Works today about this situation. It appears there was indeed a mistake. The tree scheduled for removal was supposed to be a diseased elm on Pine Street, not the oak at the corner of Maple and Pine. The work order was incorrectly written." Murmurs filled the room. Tom felt a mix of relief and skepticism. A clerical error? It seemed too convenient. "In light of this," Diane continued, "I propose that we take 2 actions. First, the oak tree should be officially evaluated by the city arborist, with the results made public. Second, I move that we create a special committee to review the sidewalk expansion project with a focus on preserving neighborhood character, including mature trees wherever possible. Tom stared at her surprised. This wasn't what he had expected. Henderson looked equally surprised. Do I hear a second for Councilwoman Wilson's motion? Another council member quickly seconded, and after a brief discussion, the motion passed, unanimously. Henderson announced that applications for the special committee would be available at the front desk, and that they hoped to have the committee formed within 2 weeks. As the meeting moved on to other topics, Tom found himself wondering if he should apply for the committee. He'd never been involved in city government before, always preferring to mind his own business. But something had changed. Maybe it was the threat to the oak tree, or maybe it was seeing how many of his neighbors cared about it too. But Tom found himself wanting to be part of the process. When the meeting finally adjourned, people gathered in small groups discussing what had happened. Nora turned to Tom with an excited expression. "Are you going to apply for the committee?" she asked. Tom hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm qualified." "Of course you are," Nora insisted. "You care about the neighborhood. You ask good questions. That's exactly the kind of person who should be involved." Into their daily routines. Only Tom, Diane, and a few others remained near the old oak. "There's a council meeting tomorrow night," Diane said after a moment. "You should come. If you care about this neighborhood as much as you say, be part of the conversation about its future." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Tom alone with the tree that had sparked so much commotion. He looked up at its sprawling branches, at the dappled sunlight filtering through its leaves. The tree had stood there for decades, witnessing the changes in the neighborhood, families coming and going, houses being built and renovated, children growing up and moving away. Perhaps it was time for Tom to stop standing on his porch, watching the world change around him. Perhaps it was time to have a say in those changes. With a last look at the old oak, he turned and walked back to his house, already thinking about what he would say at tomorrow night's council meeting. The battle for the old oak tree had only just begun, and with it, a new chapter in the life of the neighborhood Tom had called home for so long. Tom hadn't set foot in City Hall for almost 15 years. The last time had been for a property tax dispute that had left him frustrated and no better off financially. As he pushed through the heavy glass doors, the familiar scent of old paper and floor polish brought back those unpleasant memories. The council chambers were already filling up when he arrived. Tom spotted several faces from yesterday's confrontation at the oak tree, including old Mr. Rivera, who sat near the front, his cane propped against the chair beside him. Dr. Lewis, the plant pathologist, was there too, flipping through some papers with a focused expression. Tom chose a seat in the middle of the room, not wanting to appear too eager by sitting in the front row, but not hiding in the back either. A young woman he didn't recognize sat down beside him, offering a polite smile. "First time at a council meeting?" she asked. Tom shook his head. "No, but it's been a while. You?" "I try to come to all of them," she said. "I'm Nora, by the way. I run the community blog." "Tom Chen," he replied, suddenly realizing why she looked vaguely familiar. He'd seen her around the neighborhood, usually, with a camera or notebook in hand. "You're the one who's been writing about the sidewalk expansion project." Nora nodded. "Among other things. I hear you had quite the standoff with the city workers yesterday." Tom felt his face grow warm. "News travels fast. Small neighborhoods always have the best grapevines," Nora said with a smile. "Mind if I ask you a few questions after the meeting? I'd love to get your perspective on the oak tree situation." Before Tom could answer, the room fell quiet as the council members filed in and took their seats at the raised table at the front. Diane was among them, dressed in a navy blazer that made her look more official than she had in her casual clothes the day before. She caught Tom's eye briefly but gave no indication of recognition. The council meeting began with standard procedures, approving minutes from the last meeting, hearing reports from various departments. Tom listened with increasing impatience. The oak tree wasn't mentioned in any of these reports, and he began to wonder if he'd wasted his evening coming here. Finally, the council president, a stern-looking man named Henderson, announced they were moving to public comments. Anyone wishing to address the council may line up at the microphone. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes. Tom hesitated, suddenly nervous about speaking in public. But when he saw Mr. Rivera slowly making his way to the microphone line, leaning heavily on his cane, Tom found himself standing up to join him. There were 5 people ahead of Tom in line. The first few spoke about unrelated matters: a request for a stop sign at a dangerous intersection, a complaint about noise from a local bar, a question about recycling pickup. Tom barely listened, rehearsing what he wanted to say in his head. Then, it was Mr. Rivera's turn. The old man stood at the microphone, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted it to his height. "My name is Carlos Rivera," he began, his voice stronger than Tom had expected. "I've lived in this town for 62 years. I want to talk about the oak tree at Maple and Pine." He paused, looking directly at the council members. "That tree means something to our neighborhood. It's not just decoration. It's part of our history." Henderson nodded impatiently. "Yes, Mr. Rivera, we're aware of the situation. The removal has been temporarily postponed, pending further evaluation." "But why was it scheduled for removal in the first place?" Mr. Rivera pressed. "We were told it had oak wilt, but Dr. Lewis examined it yesterday and found no disease. Someone made that decision. Someone sent those workers to cut down a healthy tree. We deserve to know who and why." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Henderson looked uncomfortable. "This is a matter for the Public Works Department. They make determinations about tree health and safety." "Then why isn't someone from Public Works here to explain?" Mr. Rivera asked. "Your 3 minutes are up, Mr. Rivera," Henderson said firmly. "Next speaker, please." Tom stepped up to the microphone, his heart pounding. He'd planned to talk about his personal connection to the tree, about his children climbing it, about its importance to him. But Mr. Rivera's questions had changed his mind. "My name is Tom Chen," he began. "I live across from the oak tree on Maple Street. Yesterday, city workers arrived to remove it, claiming it had oak wilt. But when Dr. Lewis examined it, she found no disease." He paused, gathering his courage. "What I want to know is why the removal was ordered in the first place. And I can't help wondering if it has anything to do with the sidewalk expansion project that would require removing that tree anyway." He looked directly at Diane as he said this. Her expression remained neutral, but he noticed her straighten slightly in her chair. "Mr. Chen," Henderson began, but Tom wasn't finished. "This isn't just about one tree. It's about how decisions are made in this community. It's about transparency. If the tree needs to come down for the sidewalk project, then say so. Don't make up a story about disease." Henderson frowned. "Mr. Chen, no one is making up stories. If there was a misdiagnosis of the tree's condition, that's a separate issue from the sidewalk project, which is still in the planning phase." "Then why won't anyone explain how the misdiagnosis happened?" Tom pressed. "Who examined the tree? When? Can we see the report?" Henderson's frown deepened. "Your time is up, Mr. Chen. Next speaker." Tom returned to his seat, frustration building inside him. He'd accomplished nothing except perhaps making himself look like a troublemaker. Nora gave him an encouraging smile as he sat down. "Good questions," she whispered. The next speaker was Dr. Lewis, who spoke in precise scientific terms about the oak's health, explaining that she had found no evidence of disease and offering to provide a written assessment. The council thanked her politely but made no commitments. Several more residents spoke about the tree, all in favor of saving it. Tom felt a growing sense of hope as speaker after speaker expressed support. The oak clearly meant something to more people than just him. Finally, Henderson announced they were moving on to the next agenda item. Tom felt deflated. Was that it? No answers, no explanations, just thank you for your comments? But then Diane raised her hand. "Mr. President, if I may address the concerns about the oak tree before we move on?" Henderson looked surprised but nodded. "Councilwoman Wilson, you have the floor." Diane stood, smoothing her blazer. I want to thank everyone who spoke about the oak tree tonight. Your passion for our community is commendable. She paused, looking around the room. I've spoken with the Director of Public Works today about this situation. It appears there was indeed a mistake. The tree scheduled for removal was supposed to be a diseased elm on Pine Street, not the oak at the corner of Maple and Pine. The work order was incorrectly written. Murmurs filled the room. Tom felt a mix of relief and skepticism. A clerical error? It seemed too convenient. In light of this, Diane continued, I propose that we take two actions. First, the oak tree should be officially evaluated by the city arborist, with the results made public. Second, I move that we create a special committee to review the sidewalk expansion project with a focus on preserving neighborhood character, including mature trees wherever possible. Tom stared at her, surprised. This wasn't what he had expected. Henderson looked equally surprised. Do I hear a second for Councilwoman Wilson's motion? Another council member quickly seconded, and after a brief discussion, the motion passed, unanimously. Henderson announced that applications for the special committee would be available at the front desk, and that they hoped to have the committee formed within 2 weeks. As the meeting moved on to other topics, Tom found himself wondering if he should apply for the committee. He'd never been involved in city government before, always preferring to mind his own business. But something had changed. Maybe it was the threat to the oak tree, or maybe it was seeing how many of his neighbors cared about it too. But Tom found himself wanting to be part of the process. When the meeting finally adjourned, people gathered in small groups discussing what had happened. Nora turned to Tom with an excited expression. Are you going to apply for the committee? She asked. Tom hesitated. I'm not sure I'm qualified. Of course you are, Nora insisted. You care about the neighborhood. You ask good questions. That's exactly the kind of person who should be involved. Jenkins looked uncomfortable. Well, that's why you're all here, isn't it? To explore alternatives. But I should warn you that any major changes to the plan will increase costs and potentially delay implementation. Then let's look at the plan, street by street, Keith the engineer suggested. Maybe there are places where we can work around existing trees, even if it means the sidewalk isn't perfectly straight or uniform in width. That would require variances from the standard design, Jenkins said hesitantly. But it's possible, Keith pressed. Jenkins nodded reluctantly. Technically, yes, but it would complicate construction and potentially create new hazards or accessibility issues. I think it's worth exploring. Lena from the Business Association chimed in. The mature trees add value to our business district. They create shade, in summer, which encourages people to walk to local shops instead of driving to the mall. The discussion continued, with committee members asking detailed questions about the plan. Tom was impressed with how prepared everyone seemed, how invested they were in finding a solution that worked for the whole community. As the meeting progressed, it became clear that there were two priorities everyone agreed on: improving accessibility and preserving as many mature trees as possible. The question was how to balance these sometimes competing goals. What about a case-by-case assessment? Tom suggested. Instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, we could look at each street, each tree, and make decisions based on the specific circumstances. That would significantly increase the planning time and cost, Jenkins objected, but it might save money. In the long run, Keith countered. Removing and replacing dozens of mature trees isn't cheap. Neither is dealing with the increased stormwater runoff when you lose that much tree cover. Adam, who had been quiet for much of the meeting, spoke up. I moved to this neighborhood because of its character, the tree-lined streets, the sense of history. I support better accessibility, but not at the cost of turning this into just another cookie-cutter suburb. Diane had been observing the discussion without commenting, but now she leaned forward. These are all valid concerns. Why don't we take a step back and think about priorities? If we had to rank what matters most in this project, what would it be? The committee spent the next hour creating a priority list. At the top were safety and basic accessibility, ensuring that people with mobility issues could navigate the sidewalks. Second was preserving mature trees whenever possible. Third was managing costs effectively. Fourth was maintaining the neighborhood's aesthetic character. "This is a good start," Diane said when they had finished. "For our next meeting, I'd like each of you to walk through the neighborhood with these priorities in mind. Make notes about specific areas where you see conflicts or opportunities. Mr. Jenkins will provide maps you can mark up." As the meeting wrapped up, Tom felt cautiously optimistic. The committee seemed genuinely engaged and diverse in their perspectives. Even Jenkins, despite his initial resistance, had begun noting down alternative approaches to consider. Outside the community center, Tom found himself walking to the parking lot with Dr. Lewis and Mr. Rivera. "What did you think?" he asked them. "It's a start," Dr. Lewis said. "At least everyone seems to agree that the trees matter." "Diane surprised me," Mr. Rivera admitted. "I expected her to push harder for the original plan." "She's a politician," Tom reminded them. "She knows which way the wind is blowing. After all that publicity about the oak tree, she can't ignore community sentiment." "Speaking of which," Dr. Lewis said, "have you seen Nora's latest blog post? She's been documenting all the trees that would be affected by the sidewalk project. She's got photographs and histories of each one. It's quite powerful." Tom hadn't seen it yet, but made a mental note to check it out. "Do you think this committee will actually make a difference?" he asked. "That depends on us," Dr. Lewis replied. "If we present a unified, well-researched alternative that meets the essential goals of the project, they'll have to take it seriously. And if they don't," Mr. Rivera added with a mischievous smile, "we can always chain ourselves to the trees. I may be old, but I can still make a scene." Tom laughed, though he wasn't entirely sure the old man was joking. Over the next week, Tom threw himself into the committee work with unexpected enthusiasm. He spent hours walking the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, examining every section of sidewalk, every tree that might be affected. He talked to neighbors, asking about their experiences navigating the existing sidewalks, their attachment to particular trees or landscape features. He ran into other committee members doing the same thing. Adam was photographing interesting architectural details that might be affected by the construction. Keith was measuring sidewalk widths and the distance between trees and curbs, mumbling calculations to himself. Lena was talking to shop owners about how the construction might affect their businesses. Tom also found himself checking Nora's blog daily. True to Dr. Lewis's description, she had created a powerful visual record of the trees at risk, complete, with historical photographs showing how they had grown with the neighborhood. Under the oak tree entry, neighbors had left dozens of comments sharing their memories and connections to it. The night before the second committee meeting, Tom sat on his porch as usual, staring at the old oak in the fading light. His clipboard was full of notes and ideas, his mind buzzing with possible solutions. For the first time in years, he felt energized, engaged with his community in a way he hadn't been since his wife passed away. The oak's leaves rustled in the evening breeze, as if encouraging him. Tom smiled at the thought. It was just a tree, after all, but it had become something more, a symbol of connection, of continuity, of caring about the place where you lived. His phone rang, interrupting his reverie. It was Lisa. "How's the committee going, Dad?" she asked after they'd exchanged greetings. Tom surprised himself with his enthusiastic response, telling her about the priority list, the neighborhood walks, the conversations with neighbors. "I haven't heard you this excited about something in a long time," Lisa said, her voice warm. "Mom would be proud." The mention of his late wife sent a pang through Tom's chest, but it was a bittersweet feeling rather than the sharp grief that had once accompanied thoughts of her. "She always was the one who got involved in community stuff," he said. "I was too busy working." "Well, now you're making up for it," Lisa replied. "I'm really proud of you, Dad." After they hung up, Tom remained on the porch until darkness fell. Completely. Tomorrow's committee meeting would be crucial. They would begin the real work of finding alternatives to the original plan. He wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy, but for the first time he believed it was possible. As he finally rose to go inside, Tom glanced once more at the oak tree, a dark silhouette against the night sky. "We're working on it," he murmured, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to a tree. Hang in there. The second committee meeting proved even more productive than the first. Each member presented their observations and ideas, and together they began to sketch out an alternative approach to the sidewalk project, one that would preserve most of the mature trees while still achieving the accessibility goals. Keith's engineering expertise proved invaluable. He proposed solutions like narrowing the street slightly in certain sections to allow for wider sidewalks without removing trees, using permeable paving materials around tree roots, and creating occasional bump outs where the sidewalk would curve around particularly significant trees. It won't be as straight and uniform as the original plan, he admitted, but it would maintain accessibility standards while preserving most of the mature trees. Jenkins, the planning department representative, looked skeptical but took detailed notes. These kinds of customizations will increase costs, he warned again. But by how much? Lena challenged. We need specific numbers to make informed decisions, not just vague warnings about increased costs. Jenkins promised to provide cost estimates for their alternative approaches at the next meeting. As the weeks passed and the committee continued its work, Tom found himself increasingly invested in not just saving the oak tree, but in the entire process of community planning. He read books on urban design, researched how other cities had balanced infrastructure improvements with environmental preservation, and spent countless hours discussing ideas with his fellow committee members. The oak tree that had started it all became a test case for their approach. They developed a detailed plan for that intersection, showing how the sidewalk could curve around the tree, with special paving to protect the roots and ensure a smooth surface for wheelchairs and strollers. When Jenkins presented the cost estimates, for their alternative approach, they were indeed higher than the original plan, about 15% higher overall. But the committee had anticipated this and come prepared with research on grants for green infrastructure and the economic benefits of mature tree preservation, from reduced cooling costs for nearby buildings to increased property values. Plus, there are the intangible benefits, Mr. Rivera pointed out. The sense of place, the connection to history, the simple beauty of tree-lined streets. You can't put a price tag on those things, but they matter to quality of life. By the time the committee was ready to present their recommendation to the full council, 3 months had passed. What had begun as a confrontation over a single tree had evolved into a comprehensive vision for neighborhood improvement that balanced accessibility with preservation, modern standards with historical character. The night before the council presentation, Tom sat on his porch as usual, looking at the oak tree. It was early autumn now, and its leaves were just beginning to turn golden at the edges. Tomorrow would determine whether it would remain standing, whether all their work would make a difference. His phone buzzed with a text from Nora. Big crowd expected tomorrow. Blog readers are fired up to support the committee's plan. Tom smiled. Whatever happened, they had accomplished something important. They had engaged the community, had demonstrated that ordinary citizens could have a voice in shaping the places where they lived. That alone made the whole effort worthwhile. As dusk settled over the neighborhood, Tom watched a young family stop beneath the oak tree. The parents stood talking while their small child ran circles around the massive trunk, occasionally reaching up to touch the rough bark with wonder on their face. New memories being created, new connections being formed with this living landmark. Tom Chen, who had once been content to watch the world change from the isolation of his porch, found himself looking forward to tomorrow's council meeting with a mixture of nervousness and excitement. The outcome mattered, of course, but what mattered more was that he had chosen to participate, to engage, to care. The oak tree had given him that gift at least, regardless of what the future held. The council chambers were packed to capacity. Tom had arrived 30 minutes early, hoping for a good seat. But already the room was filling with neighbors, business owners, and other community members. Nora had been right about the turnout. Her blog had clearly mobilized people to attend. Tom spotted Mr. Rivera near the front, saving seats for the committee members. He made his way through the crowd, nodding to familiar faces. It seemed like half the neighborhood had turned out for this meeting. Quite a crowd, Tom commented as he took his seat next to the elderly man. Mr. Rivera nodded, looking pleased. Nothing like a little controversy to get people engaged in local government. The other committee members arrived one by one, all looking slightly nervous but determined. They had prepared diligently for this presentation, refining their alternative plan, anticipating questions and objections, practicing their parts of the presentation until they flowed smoothly. But facing the full council, and such a large audience, was still intimidating. Keith, whose engineering background made him the most comfortable with technical presentations, would lead the main overview of their alternative plan. Dr. Lewis would address the environmental aspects, while Lena covered the economic considerations. Tom would present the case study of the oak tree intersection specifically, and Mr. Rivera would speak to the historical and community significance of preserving the neighborhood's character. Adam and Brenda would handle specific concerns about accessibility and practical implementation. As the meeting time approached, Tom saw Diane enter through a side door with the other council members. She caught his eye briefly and gave a small nod, her expression unreadable. Tom still wasn't sure where she truly stood on their proposal. She had been supportive during committee meetings, but was that genuine or just political maneuvering? Council President Henderson called the meeting to order precisely at 7 p.m. After routine business was conducted, he announced that they would now hear the presentation from the Sidewalk Expansion Review Committee. Keith stood and made his way to the podium, laptop in hand to connect to the projector. The room fell silent as he began to speak, outlining the committee's approach and objectives. Our goal was to find a balance, Keith explained, showing slides of their alternative design. We wanted to ensure that the sidewalks meet modern accessibility standards while preserving as much of the neighborhood's mature tree canopy and character as possible. He walked the council through their approach, street by street, showing how they had identified critical areas where trees could be saved with modest modifications to the original plan. The presentation was clear, professional, and compelling. Dr. Lewis spoke next, explaining the environmental benefits of their approach. Mature trees provide significantly more environmental services than newly planted saplings, she explained. A 50-year-old oak processes about 11,000 gallons of water annually, while a 10-year-old replacement would process only a fraction of that. By preserving these trees, we reduce flooding risks, lower ambient temperatures in summer, and maintain vital wildlife habitat. Lena followed with the economic analysis, demonstrating that while their plan would cost more upfront, the long-term benefits, including increased property values, reduced stormwater management costs, and enhanced commercial district appeal, would more than offset the initial investment. When it was Tom's turn to present, he felt a flutter of nervousness as he approached the podium. Public speaking had never been his strong suit. But as he began to talk about the oak tree intersection, showing their detailed plans for how the sidewalk could curve gracefully around the massive trunk, while still providing ample space for wheelchairs and strollers, his nervousness faded. This was something he cared about, something he had invested countless hours in understanding and planning. His passion came through in his voice, in the careful way he explained their solution. This intersection exemplifies our approach, Tom concluded. By thinking creatively, we can honor both our past and our future. We can build infrastructure that serves everyone's needs while preserving the landmarks that give our neighborhood its unique character. Mr. Rivera spoke movingly about community heritage, and Adam and Brenda effectively addressed potential concerns about the practical aspects of implementation. By the time they concluded, Tom felt confident they had made their case well. Council, President Henderson thanked the committee for their presentation, then opened the floor for questions from the council. The first few were technical in nature, directed mainly at Keith. Questions about sidewalk width in specific locations, about the durability of the permeable paving materials they had proposed, about maintenance considerations. Then, Councilman Taylor, known for his fiscal conservatism, raised the issue they had been expecting. This alternative plan will cost 15% more than the original proposal. Where do you suggest we find that additional funding in an already tight budget? Lena was prepared for this. She outlined their research into available grants for green infrastructure and urban forestry projects. Additionally, she added, we've identified several areas where costs could be reduced in other parts of the project without compromising quality or accessibility. The questioning continued for nearly an hour. Some council members seemed genuinely interested in the committee's approach, asking thoughtful questions that built on their ideas. Others appeared more skeptical, focusing on potential problems or complications. Through it all, Diane remained surprisingly quiet. She asked a few clarifying questions but gave no indication of her position on their proposal. Tom couldn't decide if that was a good sign or a bad one. Finally, Henderson announced it was time for public comments. We have a large number of people who wish to speak tonight, he said, looking out at the packed chamber. Please keep your remarks brief so everyone has a chance to be heard. What followed was an outpouring of community support that took even Tom by surprise. Resident after resident approached the microphone to speak in favor of the committee's plan. Many shared personal stories of their connection to particular trees or sections of the neighborhood that would be preserved under the alternative approach. An elderly woman who had lived in the neighborhood for over 70 years described watching the oak tree grow from a sapling. A young mother talked about how her children played beneath its branches, just as she had as a child. The owner of the coffee shop near the intersection spoke about how customers specifically chose to sit at the sidewalk tables near the oak for its shade and beauty. There were a few dissenting voices. A man who used a wheelchair spoke passionately about the daily challenges he faced navigating the existing narrow sidewalks, emphasizing that accessibility should be the top priority. A woman who lived on a street with severely buckled sidewalks questioned whether trees should take precedence over safety. But the overwhelming majority supported the committee's balanced approach. When Nora stepped up to the microphone, she brought with her a petition signed by over 500 residents supporting the alternative plan. These signatures represent people from every street in the neighborhood, she told the council. Homeowners and renters, business owners and customers, young families and lifelong residents. They all support a plan that preserves our trees while improving our infrastructure. By the time the public comment period ended, it was nearly 10 p.m. Henderson called for a brief recess before the council would deliberate and vote on the proposal. Tom and the other committee members gathered in the hallway, all looking slightly shell-shocked by the outpouring of support. I think we have a real chance, Keith said quietly. The turnout was incredible. It's not just about numbers, Lena cautioned. It's about budgets and schedules and politics. Whatever happens, Mr. Rivera said, patting Tom's shoulder, we've already won something important. Look at all these people engaging with local government, caring about the future of their neighborhood. That wouldn't have happened if you hadn't stood up for that tree. Tom felt embarrassed by the praise. We all did this together, he insisted. When the council reconvened, Henderson announced that they would now discuss and vote on the committee's proposal. What followed was a surprisingly frank conversation among the council members, with differing views being expressed openly. Councilwoman Rodriguez spoke strongly in favor of the alternative plan, praising its creativity and responsiveness to community values. Councilman Taylor remained concerned about the budget implications but acknowledged the potential for grant funding to offset the difference. Two other council members seemed to be leaning toward approval, while one was clearly opposed, prioritizing standardization and ease of construction over tree preservation. That left Diane as the likely deciding vote. When she finally spoke, all eyes in the chamber turned to her. I want to commend the committee for their extraordinary work, she began. When I proposed creating this group, I honestly wasn't sure what would come of it. Some of my colleagues, she glanced at Taylor, were concerned it would simply delay an important infrastructure project. She paused, looking around the chamber. Instead, the committee has demonstrated what true community engagement can accomplish. They've created a thoughtful, detailed alternative that balances competing priorities in a way our original plan did not. Tom felt a flutter of hope. Was she going to support them? However, Diane continued, I do have concerns about implementation. The custom approaches required for certain sections will complicate construction and potentially create maintenance challenges down the road. The hope in Tom's chest began to deflate. Therefore, Diane said, I propose that we accept the committee's plan in principle, but with 2 modifications. The room was utterly silent as she outlined her proposed changes. First, she wanted a detailed implementation schedule that would prioritize the most critical accessibility improvements, potentially phasing the project over 3 years instead of completing it all at once. Second, she suggested creating an ongoing oversight committee that would work with the construction teams to address any unexpected issues that arose during implementation. These modifications would ensure that the project moves forward efficiently while still preserving the core values of the committee's proposal, Diane concluded. The council discussed these modifications briefly, then Henderson called for a vote on the amended proposal. Tom held his breath as each council member voted. When the final tally was announced, 5 in favor, 1 against, a cheer erupted from the audience. They had won. Not completely, not perfectly, but substantially. The oak tree would stand. Most of the other mature trees would be preserved. The sidewalks would be improved for everyone. The neighborhood's character would remain intact while becoming more accessible. As the meeting adjourned, people swarmed around the committee members, offering congratulations and thanks. Tom found himself shaking hands with neighbors he'd barely spoken to before, receiving pats on the back and words of appreciation. It was overwhelming, especially for someone who had spent the past few years largely keeping to himself. Eventually, the crowd thinned, and Tom found himself face to face with Diane. There was an awkward moment of silence between them, the memory of their confrontation at the oak tree hanging in the air. Congratulations, Diane said finally. Your committee did exceptional work. Thank you for giving us the opportunity, Tom replied, surprising himself with his sincerity. And for supporting the modified plan. Diane smiled slightly. The modifications were necessary to get it passed. You understand that, right? Tom nodded. Politics was about compromise. He'd learned that much in the past few months. What matters is that we found a solution that works for everyone. Not everyone, Diane corrected. No solution ever works for everyone, but this one works for most people, and it's better than what we started with. That's about as good as it gets in local government. As she turned to leave, Tom found himself asking, was the tree really marked for removal by mistake? Or was that just a convenient explanation? Diane paused, looking back at him with an unreadable expression. Does it matter now? Tom thought about it. I suppose not. What matters is what we do going forward. Exactly, Diane said. Speaking of which, the oversight committee I proposed will need members with detailed knowledge of the plan. People who care enough to make sure it's implemented properly. She gave him a meaningful look. Are you offering me another committee position? Tom asked, surprised. Consider it a standing invitation, Diane replied. You've proven you have a lot to contribute to this community, Mr. Chen. We need more people like you involved in local government, not just in a crisis, but every day. With that, she walked away, leaving Tom to consider her words. Another committee, more meetings, more work, more engagement with the messy, complicated process of community decision-making. A month ago, he would have dismissed the idea immediately. Now, he wasn't so sure. Outside City Hall, Tom found the other committee members, waiting, along with Nora and several neighbors. They were planning to go to the all-night diner to celebrate. Coming, Tom? Dr. Lewis called out. Tom hesitated only briefly before nodding. I'll be right there. As they walked toward the diner, Tom found himself in step with Mr. Rivera, who was moving slowly with his cane. So, the old man said, his eyes twinkling. Ready for another round of committee meetings? News traveled fast, apparently. I haven't decided yet, Tom admitted. Take it from someone who's been around long enough to see how things work, Mr. Rivera said. Change doesn't happen all at once, and it doesn't happen without people staying involved, paying attention, speaking up when it matters. Tom thought about his life before the oak tree controversy, the quiet days spent on his porch watching the world go by, feeling disconnected from the community around him. And he thought about the past few months, The conversations, the research, the sense of purpose he'd found in working towards something larger than himself. "I'll think about it," he promised. Mr. Rivera smiled. That's all anyone can ask. The diner was bright and warm, filled with the happy voices of people who had worked together and accomplished something meaningful. As Tom settled into a booth with his new friends, he realized that what had begun with a single tree had grown into something much more significant. A renewed connection to his community, a sense of agency in shaping its future, and perhaps, most importantly, a reminder that one person standing up for what they care about could still make a difference, even in a world that often felt too big and too complex to change. The oak tree would stand, and Tom Chen would no longer be just watching from his porch. He would be participating, engaging, contributing to the ongoing story of the neighborhood he called home. It wasn't a perfect ending. Real life rarely provided those. But it was a good one, full of possibility and promise for what might come next. 1 year after the council vote, Tom stood at the corner of Maple and Pine, watching as workers carefully laid permeable pavers around the base of the oak tree. The sidewalk widening project was in full swing, and this intersection, the one that had started it all, was finally being transformed, but not in the way originally planned. Instead of a straight uniform concrete path that would have required removing the oak, the new sidewalk curved gracefully around the massive trunk. Special pavers allowed water to reach the roots while providing a smooth, stable surface for wheelchairs, strollers, and pedestrians of all abilities. "Looking good, isn't it?" a voice said beside him. Tom turned to see Diane approaching, a folder tucked under her arm. In the year since the contentious council meeting, they had developed an unlikely working relationship as part of the Implementation Oversight Committee. Not quite friendship. There was too much history and too many fundamental differences in their perspectives for that, but a respectful collaboration. "Better than I expected," Tom admitted, gesturing to where the construction foreman was, explaining something to Keith, who had become the committee's technical liaison. "Keith has been out here every day making sure they follow the specifications exactly." "He's dedicated," Diane agreed. "You all are. That's what's made this project work despite all the complications." The complications had been numerous. Materials had arrived late. Cost estimates had needed adjustment. Unexpected utility lines had been discovered beneath some sections of the old sidewalk. Through it all, the Oversight Committee had worked with city staff, contractors, and community members to solve problems and keep the project moving forward. "Have you seen the new trees they planted on Elm Street?" Diane asked. "The ones to replace the 3 that couldn't be saved?" Tom nodded. While their plan had preserved most of the neighborhood's mature trees, some had been too compromised by disease or too difficult to work around. For each one removed, they had insisted on planting 3 new ones, not just saplings, but more established trees that would make a visual impact sooner. "They're not the same as 100-year-old oaks," he said, "but they're a start." "That's how community building works," Diane replied. "You plant things you might not live to see in their full glory, but you plant them anyway." Tom was silent for a moment, thinking about how much had changed in the past year, not just in the neighborhood, but in himself. After his initial reluctance, he had accepted the position on the Oversight Committee. That had led to involvement in other community initiatives, a neighborhood emergency preparedness group, a mentoring program at the local school, even occasional attendance at city council meetings when issues of interest were being discussed. His porch still saw plenty of use, but now it was as likely to host committee meetings or conversations with neighbors as it was to serve as a solitary observation post. His daughter Lisa had commented on the change during her last visit, saying he seemed more energized, more connected than she'd seen him in years. The oak tree had been the catalyst, but the transformation had been about much more than saving a single tree. It had been about finding his place in a community, about realizing that engagement was more satisfying than isolation, that having a voice in local decisions was both a right and a responsibility. "Oh, before I forget," Diane said, pulling a newspaper from her folder. "Did you see Nora's article?" Tom took the paper. The headline read, "Community-led design becomes model for other neighborhoods." The article detailed how their approach to the sidewalk project, balancing accessibility needs with environmental preservation and neighborhood character, was being studied by other communities facing similar challenges. She interviewed me last week, Tom said, but I didn't realize the article was going to be this extensive. He scanned the text, finding quotes from Keith, Dr. Lewis, and several other committee members, all describing different aspects of the project. It's getting attention beyond our city limits, Diane said. The urban planning department at the university has been following our progress. They're using it as a case study for their students. Tom handed the newspaper back, feeling a mix of pride and embarrassment. We just did what made sense for our neighborhood. That's exactly why it's noteworthy, Diane replied. Too often these decisions get made from the top down, with standardized approaches that don't account for local context or community values. You and the committee demonstrated that there's another way. Across the street, Mr. Rivera emerged from his house using his walker to navigate his newly ramped driveway. The old man had become one of the most vocal advocates for the accessibility aspects of the project, even as he fought to preserve the trees and character he loved. Carlos, Diane called, waving him over. Come see the progress. It took Mr. Rivera several minutes to cross the street. Even with the new curb cuts that made the transition smoother for his walker, Tom had learned patience over the past year, the kind that came from working with people of different abilities, different perspectives, different priorities. What do you think? Tom asked when Mr. Rivera finally reached them, gesturing to the work being done around the oak. The old man studied the construction, his eyes sharp despite his physical frailty. They're doing it right, he pronounced, making sure those roots can breathe. This tree will outlive us all as it should. That was always the goal, Tom said. One of them, Mr. Rivera corrected with a smile. The other was making sure I could get around without breaking my neck on those old cracked sidewalks. Looks like we're achieving both. He turned to Diane. Is it true what I heard? The city's considering similar approaches for the downtown revitalization project? Diane nodded. The council voted last week to form a community advisory committee, similar to what we did here. The Downtown Merchants Association is already putting together a list of nominees. Progress, Mr. Rivera said with satisfaction. Slow, messy progress, but progress nonetheless. A shout from the work site drew their attention. The foreman was waving them over. We're about to pour the section connecting to the main sidewalk, he explained when they approached. Thought you might want to see it, being the original tree defenders and all. Tom felt a flush of embarrassment at the nickname, but it was meant with respect rather than mockery. Over the months of construction, the workers had come to understand why this project mattered so much to the community, why the details of implementation were worth the extra effort. They watched as the specialized concrete was carefully poured and shaped, creating a smooth transition from the permeable pavers to the standard sidewalk. It was a small moment in a year-long project, but symbolic of what they had accomplished, finding ways to connect different approaches to accommodate both tradition and innovation. As the workers finished the pour, other neighbors began to gather, drawn by curiosity about the progress. Adam from the apartments brought coffee for everyone. Dr. Lewis arrived with her camera to document this stage of the project for her environmental education classes. Nora showed up with her notebook, always looking for new angles for her community blog. What had begun as a confrontation had evolved into a collaboration, and then into something more. An ongoing conversation about how to honor the past while building for the future, how to meet diverse needs while preserving what made the neighborhood special. Later that afternoon, when the crowd had dispersed and the workers had moved on to another section, Tom returned to the oak tree alone. The new sidewalk curved around it beautifully, like it had been designed that way from the beginning, which in a sense it now had been. He placed his hand on the rough bark, feeling the solidity of the trunk, the living presence that had stood in this spot for decades before he arrived, and would likely stand for decades after he was gone. There was comfort in that continuity, in being part of something larger and more enduring than oneself. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Lisa. Dad, I just got the photos you sent of the sidewalk project. It looks amazing. They're doing good work, Tom agreed. Should be finished with this section by the time you and the kids visit next month. The children can't wait to climb that famous tree you fought for, Lisa said with a laugh. You're a local celebrity now, you know. They tell all their friends about their activist grandpa. Tom chuckled, though the description still felt strange to him. He had never set out to be an activist. He had simply stood up for something he cared about, and that had led him down an unexpected path. How's the new committee going? Lisa asked. The downtown one? I'm just an advisor, Tom clarified, offering insights from our experience with the sidewalk project. The main committee is mostly business owners and residents from that area. Still, they asked for your input. That says something about the impact you've had. Tom couldn't disagree. What had begun with one man's stand to save one tree had expanded into something much larger. A model for how communities could approach development and change, how residents could have a meaningful voice in decisions that affected their daily lives. After finishing the call with Lisa, Tom walked slowly home, taking the long route through the neighborhood to observe the project's progress on other streets. Everywhere he looked, he saw the committee's influence. Widened sidewalks that nevertheless preserved mature trees, new ramps and curb cuts that improved accessibility without sacrificing character, thoughtful compromises that served diverse needs. It wasn't perfect. No real-world solution ever was, but it was better than what had been proposed initially, and it had been shaped by the people who would live with it every day. As he approached his house, Tom saw Adam's young daughter riding her bike on the new sidewalk section that had been completed the previous week. She was using a wheelchair yesterday. Her condition meant she alternated between mobility aids, but today was a good day for pedaling. The smooth, wide path made both options easier for her. She waved as she rode past, and Tom waved back, feeling a deep satisfaction that went beyond the initial victory of saving the oak. This was why the work mattered, not just for abstract concepts like heritage or environment, but for real people, navigating their daily lives in this shared space. His porch looked inviting in the late afternoon sun. Tom settled into his familiar chair, but with a perspective that had been transformed over the past year. He no longer felt like an observer watching the world change around him, powerless to affect its course. Now he saw himself as a participant, one voice among many in the ongoing conversation about what this community was and what it could become. The Oversight Committee would wrap up its work in a few months, once the sidewalk project was complete. The Downtown Advisory Group would continue into the next year. There was talk of forming a neighborhood council to provide ongoing input on local issues, from traffic patterns to zoning decisions. Tom wasn't sure which of these efforts he would remain involved with. At 72, he valued his quiet time, his solitary moments. But he had discovered that engagement brought its own rewards, new relationships, new perspectives, a sense of purpose that he had been missing since retirement. From his porch, he could see the top of the oak tree at the corner, its leaves catching the golden late-afternoon light. It stood as it always had, rooted in place, yet growing, changing with the seasons, while maintaining its essential nature. There was wisdom in that, Tom thought, to be firmly rooted in what matters most, while still being flexible enough to adapt to changing circumstances. To grow older without becoming rigid or brittle, to provide shelter and support for new life, while drawing nourishment from deep, established roots. His phone buzzed with a message from Keith. Implementation meeting tomorrow, 10 a.m. Your place? Tom smiled as he typed his reply. Porch is open, bring coffee. The oak tree had been saved. The neighborhood was changing in ways that honored its past while serving its present needs. And Tom Chen, who had once felt like a relic of a fading era, had found a new role as a bridge between what had been and what could be. As dusk settled over the street, Tom remained on his porch, watching as neighbors walked by on the new sidewalk, some stopping to chat, others waving as they passed. The construction equipment stood silent for the night, ready to resume its work in the morning. The old oak's leaves rustled in the evening breeze, a sound that had been part of this corner's identity for longer than anyone could remember. Some battles were worth fighting even when victory wasn't guaranteed. Some connections were worth nurturing even when agreement wasn't always possible. Some roots ran deep enough to withstand the winds of change, providing stability and continuity, even as the world transformed around them. The oak tree would remain, standing at the corner of Maple and Pine, its branches stretching over both roads like protective arms, its roots now accommodated rather than severed by human progress. And Tom would remain engaged with his community, his voice now part of the chorus that shaped its future. Not a perfect ending, but a good one. Not an ending at all, really, but a new beginning. For the neighborhood, for the people who called it home, and for one man who had discovered that standing up for a single tree could lead to growth of an entirely different kind.